"You're fired," my husband James said coldly, his secretary Mariana smirking beside him in the boardroom. "We don't need dead weight anymore." I smiled politely and gathered my things, knowing they had no idea I was actually a board member who could fire them both. The next morning, when the board meeting began without them, their faces went white as they realized what they'd done. Let me take you back to how this nightmare began, and how I turned their betrayal into the sweetest revenge of my life.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
It was Tuesday morning of what should have been the best week of my life, my birthday week. I'd planned to take some time off from Kincaid Marketing Solutions to celebrate turning 35, maybe finally plan that vacation James and I had been talking about for months. Instead, I found myself sitting alone at Café Luna, the little bistro 3 blocks from our office building, picking at an overpriced quinoa salad while trying to process the conversation I'd overheard the day before. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was spending my birthday week eating lunch by myself while my husband of 8 years was probably somewhere across town with his 26-year-old secretary planning what he thought would be my public humiliation. But they had no idea what was coming. I should probably explain how I ended up in this position, married to a man who thought he could fire me from my own company while his secretary plotted against me based on lies he'd fed her about our marriage. 8 years ago, James Kincaid was everything I thought I wanted. Ambitious, charming, and devastatingly handsome with that easy smile that made clients trust him instantly. He'd joined Kincaid Marketing Solutions as a senior account executive, and within 6 months, he'd not only landed our biggest client to date, but had also swept me completely off my feet. What James didn't know then, what most people at the company still don't know, is that I'm not just Adeline Kincaid, Senior Marketing Director. I'm Adeline Kincaid, founding board member and 30% stakeholder in Kincaid Marketing Solutions. You see, when my grandfather, Samuel Randall, passed away 5 years before I met James, he left me a substantial inheritance. Rather than letting it sit in a bank account, I'd partnered with 2 other entrepreneurs, Bobby Oliver and Paul Sampson, to start a boutique marketing agency. We'd agreed from the beginning that I would work within the company as a regular employee, allowing me to understand the business from the ground up while maintaining my board position. It was unconventional, but it gave me insights into company operations that most investors never get. The other founding partners knew, of course. Bobby served as our CEO, while Paul handled operations as COO. To everyone else, including James, I was simply a talented director who'd worked her way up through the ranks. We'd maintained this fiction even after James and I married, partly because it allowed me to observe how he truly treated colleagues he perceived as having less power than him. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to those observations. For the first few years, everything seemed perfect. James was brilliant at his job, charming with clients, and I was deeply in love. He supported my career, or so I thought, and we talked about starting a family someday. The company grew rapidly under Bobby's leadership, and James was promoted to Vice President of Client Relations. But success changed him. It started small, dismissive comments about other employees, taking credit for collaborative wins, showing less interest in my day-to-day work. I told myself it was just stress from his increasing responsibilities. When Bobby had his heart attack 18 months ago and took a step back from daily operations, James naturally moved into more of a leadership role. The board, myself included, approved his promotion to Senior Vice President and gave him more autonomy in company decisions. That's when I started noticing the real changes. James began staying late more often, claiming important client calls and strategy sessions. He hired Mariana Sampson as his executive assistant, a stunning blonde fresh out of college with an MBA and an obvious crush on my husband. At first, I tried to be understanding. She was young, ambitious, and probably just admiring his professional success. How naive I was. The signs were there if I'd wanted to see them. The way Mariana's eyes would light up when James walked into a room, how she'd laugh just a little too hard at his jokes during meetings, the expensive perfume that suddenly seemed to linger in his office whenever I stopped by. The way she'd tense up whenever I appeared, as if I were interrupting something important. But it wasn't until yesterday, Monday afternoon of my birthday week, that I discovered the full scope of their betrayal. I'd been at Cafe Luna, the same place I'm sitting now, actually. I'd ordered lunch and was waiting for Bobby to join me. We'd planned to discuss some concerns I had about James's recent strategic decisions. The restaurant was crowded, typical for the lunch rush, and I was lucky to snag a corner table near the window. That's when I heard her voice. I just feel so bad for him, you know? Mariana was saying to someone at the table behind me. She's just so controlling and mean to him at home. He says she screams at him all the time, threatens him if he doesn't do exactly what she wants. My blood turned to ice. I knew she was talking about James. There was no mistaking the intimate tone, the possessive way she said him. "That's terrible," her companion replied. "No wonder he's been so stressed lately."
The worst part is he can't just leave her, Mariana continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She's got connections at the company, you know. If he divorces her, she could make things really difficult for his career. She's already been sabotaging him, trying to turn people against him. I sat frozen, my sandwich forgotten, as she painted a picture of me that was so completely false it was almost absurd. According to Mariana's version of events, I was some sort of corporate villain who psychologically abused my husband at home while politically undermining him at work. But the worst revelation was yet to come. "But he has a plan," Mariana said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "You know it's her birthday this Friday, right? Well, the company is throwing her this big party. She thinks it's to celebrate her, but James is going to use it to announce that he's leaving her. He's going to tell everyone the truth about what she's really like, how she's been treating him. That way, when he files for divorce, everyone will understand why, and she won't be able to retaliate professionally because everyone will know what kind of person she really is." My hands were shaking as I reached for my water glass. The birthday party, the celebration I thought was a sweet gesture from my colleagues, was actually going to be the stage for my public humiliation, orchestrated by my own husband. But here's what neither James nor Mariana knew. I wasn't just some mid-level employee who could be destroyed by office gossip. I was about to remind them both exactly who they were dealing with. The rest of that Monday afternoon passed in a blur. Bobby never showed up for lunch. His assistant called to say he'd been tied up in an emergency client call, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I needed time to process what I'd overheard and plan my next move carefully. I sat in that cafe for nearly 2 hours after Mariana left, my mind racing through the implications of everything she'd revealed. The lies James had told her about me being abusive and controlling weren't just cruel, they were strategic. He'd crafted an entire narrative that painted him as the victim and me as the villain, setting up his grand betrayal for maximum impact. But he'd made one critical error. He'd underestimated who he was really dealing with. That evening, James came home around 8:30, later than usual, but not unusual enough to comment on. He kissed my cheek with the same casual affection he'd shown for months, asked about my day, and suggested we order Thai food for dinner. His performance was flawless, the caring husband dealing with work stress, completely oblivious to the bomb he'd just planted in our marriage. "How was your day, honey?" he asked, loosening his tie as he scrolled through his phone. "Quiet," I replied, watching his face carefully. "I had lunch at that cafe near the office, but Bobby had to cancel. Spent most of the afternoon there just thinking." "About what?" His attention was still on his phone, probably texting Mariana. "The future. What I want the next phase of my career to look like." I wasn't lying. I was definitely thinking about the future, just not in the way he imagined. James finally looked up, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his expression. Guilt? Fear? It was gone too quickly to identify. "You know, I support whatever you want to do," he said, reaching for his laptop. "Speaking of which, I need to finish some prep work for a client presentation tomorrow. Big potential account." Another lie.
I knew from the company calendar that he had no client presentations scheduled for Tuesday.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But I simply nodded and left him to his work, retreating to our home office to do some research of my own. Over the next 3 hours, I quietly gathered intelligence. I accessed our company's internal systems, a privilege of my board position that James had forgotten I possessed, and began documenting patterns I'd noticed but never investigated. The evidence was damning. James had been systematically undermining several long-term employees, particularly women in leadership roles. He'd created performance improvement plans for 3 different directors in the past 6 months, all of whom happened to be people who'd questioned his strategic decisions. He'd also fast-tracked promotions for several of his fraternity brothers who joined the company recently, bypassing more qualified internal candidates. Most troubling was his relationship with our biggest client, Randall Industries, a major retail chain that accounts for nearly 30% of our revenue. According to the communication logs, James had been having private conversations with their CMO, discussions that weren't being reported to Bobby or the account team. The most recent emails suggested he was positioning himself as the sole point of contact, effectively cutting out other team members who'd built relationships with the client over years. But it was the financial records that really caught my attention. James had been approving expense reports for himself and his inner circle that were creative. Restaurant bills for client dinners that happened on nights when those clients were out of town. Hotel charges for business trips that didn't correspond to any scheduled meetings. Most suspicious were the charges for a luxury resort in Cabo that had been billed as a strategic planning retreat, a retreat that apparently only included James, Mariana, and 2 of his fraternity brother colleagues. By midnight, I had enough evidence to end his career, but I wanted something more satisfying than a simple termination. I wanted him to experience exactly what he'd planned to do to me, public humiliation in front of everyone he'd been trying to impress. Tuesday morning, I got to the office early and requested a private meeting with Bobby and Paul. They were both surprised to see me in the conference room at 7:30 a.m., especially since I'd supposedly been taking some time off for my birthday week. "Adeline," Bobby said, settling into his chair with his usual morning coffee, "what's so urgent? You look like you didn't sleep much." "I didn't," I admitted, sliding printed copies of my research across the table. "We have a problem, and it's bigger than we thought." For the next hour, I walked them through everything I'd discovered. Bobby's face grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the expense reports, while Paul muttered under his breath as he read through James's email communications with Randall Industries. "This is grounds for immediate termination," Paul said finally. "Hell, some of this borders on embezzlement." "It gets worse," I said, then told them about the conversation I'd overheard at the cafe. Both men stared at me in stunned silence as I described James's plan to use my birthday party as the venue for publicly destroying my reputation. "The bastard," Bobby whispered. "He's been planning this for months, hasn't he? All those little comments about your work performance, the questions about your decision-making, he's been laying groundwork." "Setting up a narrative," Paul agreed, "making people question your competence so they'd be more likely to believe his version of events." "Exactly. But here's what we're going to do instead." I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I'd been working on since 3 a.m. "James wants to make an announcement at my birthday party? Perfect. We're going to let him." Bobby raised an eyebrow. "Come again?" "We're going to restructure the company, effective immediately. I'm proposing we create a new position, Chief Strategy Officer, with oversight of all client relationships and business development. The CSO will report directly to the board and will have authority to review and approve all strategic decisions." "And you want this position to go to?" Paul asked, though I could see he already knew where I was heading. "Me. It's time I stopped pretending to be just another employee. James wants to destroy me professionally? Fine. Let him try to destroy someone who actually outranks him." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We'd announce my promotion at the birthday party, right before James had his chance to speak. Instead of being the victim of his public betrayal, I'd be the newly empowered executive who could authorize his termination. But first, we needed to handle the Mariana situation. "She's been feeding him information from your office," I told Bobby. "Every confidential discussion, every strategic decision, she's been reporting back to him. We can't move forward without addressing that security breach." "What do you suggest?" Bobby asked. I smiled for the first time in 24 hours. "Leave that to me. I have an idea that I think you'll both appreciate." Wednesday morning, I implemented the first phase of my plan. I arrived at the office early again, but this time I made sure Mariana saw me. She was already at her desk outside James's office, looking perfectly composed in a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. "Good morning, Mariana," I said, stopping by her desk with my brightest smile. "You're here early." She looked up, and for just a moment, I caught something in her expression. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just surprise at my friendly tone. "Oh, hi, Adeline. Yes, I wanted to get a head start on some reports for James." She gestured vaguely at her computer screen. "How are you? Excited about your birthday party tomorrow?" The audacity was breathtaking. Here she was asking about the very event where her lover planned to humiliate me, acting like she cared about my happiness. "Actually, that's why I wanted to talk to you," I said, perching on the edge of her desk in a way that forced her to look up at me. "I was hoping you could help me with something special for the party." Her eyes widened slightly. "Of course. What do you need?" "Well, you know how James has been under so much stress lately with all his client work." I watched her face carefully as I spoke. "I was thinking it might be nice to surprise him with something at the party, maybe a little recognition for all the extra hours he's been putting in." Mariana's cheeks flushed pink. "Oh, that's really thoughtful of you. I know he's been staying late a lot, working on that big Randall Industries account. You've been such a help to him with all those evening strategy sessions." I kept my voice warm and conversational, but I saw her stiffen slightly at the mention of their evening activities. "It's just part of the job," she said carefully. "Of course. I was thinking maybe we could put together a little presentation about his recent achievements. You probably have the best insight into all the projects he's been working on." I paused, watching her squirm. "Maybe we could meet for coffee this afternoon to discuss it. I'd love to get your perspective on how to make this really special for him." The trap was set. Mariana couldn't refuse without seeming unprofessional, but meeting with me would put her in an incredibly uncomfortable position. She'd have to either continue lying about James's work activities or find excuses to avoid giving me details. Yes, that sounds great," she said, though her smile looked strained. "Should we say 3 o'clock at Café Luna?" Perfect. The same place where I'd overheard her character assassination of me just 2 days earlier. Wonderful. I'll see you then. I spent the rest of the morning in meetings with Bobby and Paul, finalizing the details of my promotion announcement. We'd scheduled an emergency board meeting for Thursday at 4 p.m., just an hour before my birthday party. The timing would allow us to officially approve my new position and then announce it publicly when everyone was gathered for the celebration. "Are you sure you want to do it this way?" Bobby asked as we reviewed the restructuring proposal. "We could handle this more quietly, avoid the public drama." "James chose to make this public," I replied. "He wants to use my birthday party as his stage? Fine, but he's not going to be the only one with something to announce." Paul leaned back in his chair, studying me with newfound respect. "You know, I always wondered why you wanted to work your way up through the ranks instead of just taking an executive position from the start. Now I understand. You needed to know exactly how this company operates, who the real players are." He was right, though I hadn't fully realized it at the time. Those 8 years of working alongside James, watching how he treated colleagues, seeing his true character emerge as he gained more power, it had all been invaluable intelligence. At 3 o'clock sharp, I walked into Café Luna to find Mariana already seated at a corner table, nervously stirring a latte. She'd changed clothes since morning, now wearing a black dress that seemed more appropriate for a date than a work meeting. "Thank you so much for making time for this," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I really appreciate your willingness to help make James's surprise special." "Of course," she said, but her smile was brittle. "So, what did you have in mind?" Well, I was thinking we could highlight some of his recent successes. The Randall Industries account, for example. I know he's been putting in long hours on that one. I pulled out a notebook and pen, playing the role of the thoughtful wife. Can you tell me about some of the specific strategies he's been developing? Mariana's composure began to crack almost immediately. She stumbled through vague descriptions of synergistic approaches and innovative market positioning, clearly having no real knowledge of the actual client work. And those evening meetings, I continued innocently, I know he's been staying late for strategy sessions. Have those been productive? The color drained from her face. Yes, very productive. James is very thorough in his approach. I'm sure he is. I leaned forward, maintaining my friendly expression. You know, Mariana, I have to ask, has James seemed stressed to you lately? At home, he's been so tense. I worry that I'm not being supportive enough. This was where she made her fatal mistake. Instead of deflecting or keeping things professional, Mariana's obvious infatuation with my husband overrode her common sense. "Oh, you shouldn't blame yourself," she said quickly. "James is he's dealing with a lot of pressure. Sometimes when people are under stress, they can seem different at home than they are at work." "Different how?" She hesitated, clearly wanting to elaborate, but sensing dangerous ground. You know, how work stress can affect relationships. Maybe he needs more understanding about how demanding his job has become." I nodded sympathetically. "You're probably right. I should be more patient with him. It's just hard when he comes home so late and seems so distant. Sometimes I wonder if he's happy in our marriage at all." The bait was irresistible to someone who believed she was James's true confidant. "Oh, you shouldn't blame yourself," she said quickly. "James is he's dealing with a lot of pressure. Sometimes when people are under stress, they can seem different at home than they are at work." "Different how?" She hesitated, clearly wanting to elaborate, but sensing dangerous ground. You know, how work stress can affect relationships. Maybe he needs more understanding about how demanding his job has become." I nodded sympathetically. "You're probably right. I should be more patient with him. It's just hard when he comes home so late and seems so distant. Sometimes I wonder if he's happy in our marriage at all." The bait was irresistible to someone who believed she was James's true confidant. "I'm sure he loves you," Mariana said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that successful men like James need partners who understand their ambitions, who support their career goals without making them feel guilty about the sacrifices required." There it was, the same narrative she'd been fed about me being unsupportive and controlling, now being delivered directly to my face. "You're so wise," I said, writing in my notebook. "James is lucky to have someone like you looking out for his interests at work." By the time our coffee meeting ended, I had everything I needed. Mariana had essentially confirmed that she believed James's lies about our marriage, and she'd revealed enough about their relationship to prove they'd crossed professional boundaries. But more importantly, I'd planted seeds of doubt. Her discomfort throughout our conversation, her inability to provide concrete details about James's actual work, the way she'd stumbled when I asked direct questions, it all suggested she was beginning to realize she might not know the full story. Tomorrow's birthday party was going to be very educational for everyone involved. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that should have made everything feel fresh and promising. Instead, I woke up with the tight feeling in my chest that comes from knowing you're about to detonate your entire life. James was already in the shower when my alarm went off at 6 a.m. I could hear him actually humming, some song I didn't recognize. The sound made my stomach turn. Here was a man so confident in his plan to destroy me that he was literally singing in the shower on the morning he planned to execute it. "Big day today," he called out when he heard me moving around the bedroom. "Yes," I replied, "it certainly is." He emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, his hair still damp, looking more energetic than I'd seen in months. The excitement in his eyes was unmistakable. "You know, I've been thinking," he said. "After the party tonight, maybe we should plan a little getaway. Just the two of us. We haven't had quality time together in ages." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired it. He was setting up the perfect contrast. The caring husband suggesting a romantic trip, making his later revelation about my abusive behavior seem even more shocking. "That sounds lovely," I said, matching his casual tone. "Where were you thinking?" "Maybe somewhere tropical? I know this great place in Cabo that Mariana mentioned. Her family went there last year, said it was incredible." Even now, even on the morning of his planned betrayal, he couldn't resist bringing her into our conversation. The audacity was breathtaking. "Mariana has excellent taste," I said, and watched his face for any reaction to my seemingly innocent comment. There, just a flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? "We had such a nice chat yesterday about your work. She's really devoted to helping you succeed." James went very still. "You talked to Mariana yesterday?" "Just coffee. I wanted to plan something special for you at the party tonight, and I thought she'd have the best insights into all the hard work you've been doing." I kept my voice light, conversational. "She's very protective of you. It's sweet, really." I watched him process this information, trying to figure out what Mariana might have said, whether she'd revealed too much. His confident morning mood was already starting to crack. "What kind of insights?" he asked carefully. "Oh, just general things. How dedicated you've been to the Randall account, all those evening strategy sessions you've been having." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "She seems to understand the pressures you're under better than I do sometimes." James stood abruptly and walked to his closet, his back to me as he pulled out a navy suit, his confident suit, the one he wore for important presentations. "Mariana's very professional," he said, his voice slightly strained. "She takes her job seriously." "I can tell. She speaks about you with such admiration." The silence that followed was loaded with tension. James continued getting dressed, but his movements were less sure now, his earlier excitement replaced by wariness. I left him to his thoughts and went downstairs to make coffee. While the machine hummed to life, I checked my phone. 3 text messages were waiting. One from Bobby confirming the 4 p.m. board meeting, one from Paul asking if I needed any last-minute support, and one from an unknown number that made my blood run cold. "I know what you're planning. We need to talk before tonight. M." Mariana. Somehow, our coffee conversation yesterday had triggered something. Doubt, suspicion, or maybe just fear that her perfect plan was unraveling. I deleted the message and poured my coffee, mind racing. This was actually better than I'd hoped. If Mariana was panicking, it meant she was starting to question the narrative James had fed her. Desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes would only strengthen my position. The afternoon at the office passed in a strange, suspended state. James was in meetings most of the day, probably strategizing with Mariana about how to handle whatever concerns she'd raised after our coffee date. I could see them through his office window during my lunch break, heads bent together, her gesticulating animatedly while he looked increasingly tense. At 2 p.m., I got a call from Bobby asking me to come to his office. "We have a problem," he said as soon as I closed the door. "I just got off the phone with someone from Randall Industries. They're concerned about some communications they've been having with James." My heart rate picked up. What kind of communications? Apparently, he's been suggesting that there might be leadership changes coming at our company. He's been positioning himself as the continuity candidate, implying that other key personnel might be leaving soon. The scope of James's betrayal kept expanding. He wasn't just planning to humiliate me publicly, he'd been actively undermining the company's client relationships, positioning himself as the only stable option. "There's more," Bobby continued. "They mentioned that he's been scheduling calls without including the account team, private conversations about strategy that aren't being documented anywhere. They wanted to confirm with me that this was authorized." "What did you tell them?" "That I'd look into it and get back to them, but Adeline, if he's been making unauthorized commitments to our biggest client, it's grounds for immediate termination, I know." I sank into the chair across from his desk. Bobby, there's something else. I think Mariana might be starting to figure out that James hasn't been entirely honest with her. I showed him the text message. Bobby's expression darkened as he read it. She's panicking. That's good for us, but it also makes her unpredictable. If she confronts James before tonight, she might warn him that we know more than we've let on, I finished. We need to move up our timeline. The board meeting? No, keep that at 4 p.m., but I think we need to have a conversation with James before the party. Control the situation before it controls us. Bobby nodded slowly. What do you have in mind? I looked out his window towards James's office, where I could see him pacing back and forth while talking on the phone. Mariana's desk was empty. She was probably in the ladies' room, trying to figure out whatever crisis was brewing in her mind. Set up a meeting. Tell James you need to discuss the Randall situation. Make it sound routine. Just due diligence because of their call. Don't mention me. And then we spring the trap before he has a chance to spring his. The afternoon suddenly felt charged with electricity. In less than 6 hours, my marriage would be over, James's career would be destroyed, and Mariana would learn exactly how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. But first, we had a very interesting conversation to have.
I spent the rest of the morning in meetings with Bobby and Paul, finalizing the details of my promotion announcement. We'd scheduled an emergency board meeting for Thursday at 4 p.m., just an hour before my birthday party. The timing would allow us to officially approve my new position and then announce it publicly when everyone was gathered for the celebration. "Are you sure you want to do it this way?" Bobby asked as we reviewed the restructuring proposal. "We could handle this more quietly, avoid the public drama." "James chose to make this public," I replied. "He wants to use my birthday party as his stage? Fine, but he's not going to be the only one with something to announce." Paul leaned back in his chair, studying me with newfound respect. "You know, I always wondered why you wanted to work your way up through the ranks instead of just taking an executive position from the start. Now I understand. You needed to know exactly how this company operates, who the real players are." He was right, though I hadn't fully realized it at the time. Those 8 years of working alongside James, watching how he treated colleagues, seeing his true character emerge as he gained more power, it had all been invaluable intelligence. At 3 o'clock sharp, I walked into Cafe Luna to find Mariana already seated at a corner table, nervously stirring a latte. She'd changed clothes since morning, now wearing a black dress that seemed more appropriate for a date than a work meeting. "Thank you so much for making time for this," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I really appreciate your willingness to help make James's surprise special." "Of course," she said, but her smile was brittle. "So, what did you have in mind?" "Well, I was thinking we could highlight some of his recent successes. The Randall Industries account, for example. I know he's been putting in long hours on that one." I pulled out a notebook and pen, playing the role of the thoughtful wife. "Can you tell me about some of the specific strategies he's been developing?" Mariana's composure began to crack almost immediately. She stumbled through vague descriptions of synergistic approaches and innovative market positioning, clearly having no real knowledge of the actual client work. "And those evening meetings," I continued innocently, "I know he's been staying late for strategy sessions. Have those been productive?" The color drained from her face. Yes, very productive. James is very thorough in his approach." "I'm sure he is." I leaned forward, maintaining my friendly expression. "You know, Mariana, I have to ask, has James seemed stressed to you lately? At home, he's been so tense. I worry that I'm not being supportive enough." This was where she made her fatal mistake. Instead of deflecting or keeping things professional, Mariana's obvious infatuation with my husband overrode her common sense. "Oh, you shouldn't blame yourself," she said quickly. "James is he's dealing with a lot of pressure. Sometimes when people are under stress, they can seem different at home than they are at work." "Different how?" She hesitated, clearly wanting to elaborate, but sensing dangerous ground. You know, how work stress can affect relationships. Maybe he needs more understanding about how demanding his job has become." I nodded sympathetically.
You're probably right. I should be more patient with him. It's just hard when he comes home so late and seems so distant. Sometimes I wonder if he's happy in our marriage at all. The bait was irresistible to someone who believed she was James's true confidant. "Oh, you shouldn't blame yourself," she said quickly. "James is he's dealing with a lot of pressure. Sometimes when people are under stress, they can seem different at home than they are at work." "Different how?" She hesitated, clearly wanting to elaborate, but sensing dangerous ground. You know, how work stress can affect relationships. Maybe he needs more understanding about how demanding his job has become." I nodded sympathetically. "You're probably right. I should be more patient with him. It's just hard when he comes home so late and seems so distant. Sometimes I wonder if he's happy in our marriage at all." The bait was irresistible to someone who believed she was James's true confidant. "I'm sure he loves you," Mariana said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that successful men like James need partners who understand their ambitions, who support their career goals without making them feel guilty about the sacrifices required." There it was, the same narrative she'd been fed about me being unsupportive and controlling, now being delivered directly to my face. "You're so wise," I said, writing in my notebook. "James is lucky to have someone like you looking out for his interests at work." By the time our coffee meeting ended, I had everything I needed. Mariana had essentially confirmed that she believed James's lies about our marriage, and she'd revealed enough about their relationship to prove they'd crossed professional boundaries. But more importantly, I'd planted seeds of doubt. Her discomfort throughout our conversation, her inability to provide concrete details about James's actual work, the way she'd stumbled when I asked direct questions, it all suggested she was beginning to realize she might not know the full story. Tomorrow's birthday party was going to be very educational for everyone involved. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that should have made everything feel fresh and promising. Instead, I woke up with the tight feeling in my chest that comes from knowing you're about to detonate your entire life. James was already in the shower when my alarm went off at 6 a.m. I could hear him actually humming, some song I didn't recognize. The sound made my stomach turn. Here was a man so confident in his plan to destroy me that he was literally singing in the shower on the morning he planned to execute it. "Big day today," he called out when he heard me moving around the bedroom. "Yes," I replied, "it certainly is." He emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, his hair still damp, looking more energetic than I'd seen in months. The excitement in his eyes was unmistakable. "You know, I've been thinking," he said. "After the party tonight, maybe we should plan a little getaway. Just the two of us. We haven't had quality time together in ages." The silence in Bobby's office stretched out like a wire about to snap. Through the glass, I could see James's face changing as he processed Bobby's tone, the shift from collegial to something far more serious. "What do you need to tell me?" James asked. And for the first time, I heard uncertainty creep into his voice. Bobby reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. "These are the financial records from your department for the past 18 months. Expense reports, travel authorizations, client entertainment bills." James's eyes fixed on the folder with the intensity of a man watching a bomb timer countdown. "I don't understand what this has to do with..." "The Cabo Resort charges, James. February, April, and August of this year. Each time billed as a strategic planning retreat for client development." Bobby opened the folder and slid several pages across the desk. "Funny thing is, I checked with the clients you claimed to be meeting with. They were never there." I watched James's face go through a fascinating transformation. First confusion, then recognition, then the pale realization that his carefully constructed lies were unraveling in real time. There must be some mistake. Those were legitimate business expenses. For retreats that included Mariana Sampson, your executive assistant, along with 2 junior employees who happened to be your fraternity brothers. Bobby's voice remained steady, professional, devastating. None of whom have any client-facing responsibilities that would justify a luxury resort strategic planning session. James opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Bobby, I can explain. Please do, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been using company funds to take your girlfriend on vacation while lying about business purposes. The word girlfriend hung in the air like an accusation. James's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. It's not what you think. Mariana and we're not. The relationship is professional. She's been helping me develop strategies for what, James? For undermining your wife's reputation? For positioning yourself as the only stable leadership option with our biggest client? For planning to publicly humiliate Adeline at her own birthday party? James went completely white. How do you know about your plan? Let's just say you're not as discreet as you think you are. Bobby leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. Did you really think you could orchestrate this elaborate betrayal without anyone noticing? Did you think I wouldn't find out that you've been telling Mariana lies about Adeline being abusive? That you've been setting up tonight as your grand stage for destroying her reputation? Bobby, listen to me. No, James, you listen, because there are some things you don't know, some very important things about the woman you've been planning to destroy. That was my cue. I turned off the privacy glass and walked into Bobby's office, closing the door behind me with deliberate calm. James spun around in his chair, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and then dawning horror as he realized I'd been listening to everything. "Hello, darling," I said, taking the seat next to him as if we were having a pleasant dinner conversation. James's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Adeline, I can explain." "Please do. I'm particularly curious about the part where I'm supposedly abusive and controlling. That was very creative storytelling." I turned to Bobby with mock concern. Should I be worried that my husband thinks I'm psychologically damaging him? Maybe I should suggest couples therapy. "Sienna, that's not. I never said you were abusive, controlling, threatening your career." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app, setting it on Bobby's desk. "Because I have a very interesting recording of your girlfriend explaining exactly how terrible I am to you. She was quite detailed about my character flaws." The color drained entirely from James's face. "You recorded Mariana?" "I recorded a public conversation in a coffee shop where she was sharing intimate details about my marriage based on lies you told her. Did you know she actually feels sorry for you? She thinks you're trapped in this awful relationship with a woman who screams at you and threatens to destroy your career if you leave." Bobby shook his head in disgust. "You manipulated that young woman into believing your wife was abusing you, used her feelings for you to turn her into an accomplice in your scheme." "It's not a scheme," James said desperately. "Mariana doesn't understand the full situation." "The full situation being that you've been embezzling company funds to take her on romantic getaways while planning to publicly humiliate your wife at her birthday party?" I kept my voice conversational, almost curious. "Or the full situation being that you've been positioning yourself to steal our biggest client by suggesting that key personnel, meaning me, would be leaving soon." James started to stand up, then seemed to remember he was trapped between Bobby's desk and my chair. "This is insane. You can't seriously be suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, James. I'm stating facts. You've committed fraud, you've sexually harassed an employee by creating a hostile work environment based on lies, and you've attempted to interfere with client relationships for personal gain." "Sexual harassment? I never harassed anyone." "You created a hostile work environment for Mariana by lying to her about your marriage, manipulating her emotions, and using your position of authority to involve her in a scheme against another employee. That's textbook harassment, even if she doesn't realize she's a victim." The fight went out of James all at once. He slumped in his chair, finally understanding that every move he'd planned had been anticipated, every lie exposed, every manipulation turned back on him. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Bobby and I exchanged glances. The moment we'd been building toward for days was finally here. "Now," I said, "we go to your birthday party.
but I think you're going to find the evening doesn't go quite the way you planned." The emergency board meeting at 4 p.m. was swift and decisive. Within 20 minutes, the 3 founding partners had unanimously approved the creation of the Chief Strategy Officer position and my appointment to fill it. James sat through the entire proceeding in stunned silence, finally understanding the true power structure of the company he thought he was going to inherit. "The position will have oversight of all client relationships, strategic partnerships, and business development initiatives," Paul announced for the record. "Effective immediately, all external communications regarding company direction must be approved by the CSO." James found his voice at last. "This is ridiculous. You can't just create a position to—" "To what?" Bobby interrupted. "To ensure proper oversight of client relationships? To prevent unauthorized communications that might damage our reputation? I'd say recent events have proven this position is not only necessary, but overdue." As we adjourned the meeting, James lingered in the conference room like a man in shock. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the weeks of planning that had gone into my public humiliation, the lies he told Mariana about me being abusive, the systematic undermining of my reputation with colleagues. "Adeline," he said as I gathered my notes, "we need to talk privately before tonight." "I think we've said everything we need to say, James. Please, 5 minutes, just you and me." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We walked to his office in silence, and I noticed that Mariana still hadn't returned from wherever she'd disappeared to that afternoon. Her desk was cluttered with half-finished reports and an untouched salad from lunch. James closed his office door and leaned against it as if he could physically prevent the inevitable from happening. "This doesn't have to destroy everything," he said. "We can work this out. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this." "What exactly would you like to fix, James? The fraud? The lies? The affair? Or just the inconvenient fact that I found out about all of it?" "It's not an affair. Mariana and I, we never what? Never went to Cabo together on company money? Never had intimate conversations about how terrible your wife is? Never planned to humiliate me in front of our entire company?" I sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd sat countless times as his supportive wife, listening to his work problems and offering advice. "What exactly didn't happen, James?" He ran his hands through his hair, messing up the perfect styling he'd spent so much time on that morning. "I know how it looks, but it's not what you think. Mariana has feelings for me, yes, but I never encouraged them. I was just trying to manage a difficult situation." "By lying to her about me being abusive?" "I never said you were abusive. I might have mentioned that we were having problems, that you didn't understand the pressures of my job. You told her I scream at you at home and threaten your career. You convinced her that I'm some kind of corporate villain who's been sabotaging you professionally. Those weren't vague mentions of marital problems, James. Those were calculated lies designed to make her hate me." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his expression. Not the desperate manipulation I'd been seeing, but something that might have been actual remorse. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said quietly. "It started small. She noticed I was stressed, asked if everything was okay at home. I wanted someone to understand what it felt like to be married to someone so successful, so connected, someone who could overshadow everything I tried to accomplish." For the first time in weeks, I heard something that sounded like honesty from my husband, and it was almost worse than the lies. "You resented me," I said. It wasn't a question. "Not resented, but yes, maybe I was jealous sometimes. Everyone always talks about how lucky I am to be married to you, how brilliant you are, how much the company values your contributions. Do you know what it's like to be known as Adeline's husband instead of being recognized for your own work? So you decided to destroy my reputation to elevate yourself? I decided to level the playing field. I thought if people saw that you weren't perfect, weren't this untouchable golden employee, then maybe my contributions would be recognized too."
The honesty was brutal in its selfishness. James hadn't betrayed me out of love for someone else, or even out of hatred for me. He'd done it out of wounded ego, out of a desperate need to be seen as the more important spouse. And tonight's plan? The public humiliation at my birthday party? James looked genuinely ashamed for the first time. I thought if I could show everyone that our marriage was falling apart because of your behavior, then when we divorced, it would seem justified. People would understand why I had to leave. Except our marriage wasn't falling apart because of my behavior. You made it fall apart by having an affair and embezzling company funds. It's not an affair, he insisted again, but his voice lacked conviction. James, you've been taking another woman on romantic vacations, sharing intimate details about our marriage, and planning a future where she has a prominent role in your professional life? What would you call that? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. A knock on the door interrupted our conversation. Through the glass wall, I could see Mariana standing outside, her face pale and her hands shaking slightly as she clutched a manila envelope. "Come in," James called, and I noticed how his entire demeanor changed, straightening in his chair, smoothing his hair, putting on the charming smile that had won her over in the first place. Mariana entered hesitantly, her eyes darting between James and me with obvious discomfort. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I need to speak with both of you before the party tonight." She held up the envelope, and I had a sinking suspicion that our carefully orchestrated plan was about to encounter an unexpected complication. Mariana's entrance shifted the entire energy in the room. She looked like she'd been crying, her makeup was smudged despite obvious attempts to fix it, and she kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear? Guilt? Something else entirely. "What's in the envelope, Mariana?" James asked, but his casual tone didn't match the tension in his shoulders. She didn't answer him directly. Instead, she looked at me with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "Adeline, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course," I said carefully, unsure where this was heading. "Yesterday at coffee, when you asked me about James's work projects, about the evening strategy sessions, you already knew, didn't you? You knew they weren't really work meetings." James went rigid in his chair. "Mariana, what are you talking about?" She ignored him completely, keeping her focus on me. "The way you phrased your questions, the things you seemed to know about his schedule, you weren't asking for information. You were testing me." I had to admire her intelligence, even in this moment. "What makes you think that?" "Because I spent all night and most of today thinking about our conversation, and I realized that some of the things you mentioned, specific meetings, certain client calls, those details weren't in James's public calendar. The only way you could have known about them is if you had access to confidential scheduling information." She was right, of course. In my eagerness to test how much she knew about James's real activities, I'd revealed that I had information she thought I shouldn't possess. James found his voice. "Mariana, you're overthinking this. Adeline probably just—" "No, James, I'm not overthinking anything. For the first time in months, I'm actually thinking clearly." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of printed documents. I went back through everything. All the stories you told me about your marriage, all the explanations about why Adeline was so difficult, all the reasons you gave for why you couldn't just leave her. My heart started beating faster. This conversation was heading somewhere I hadn't anticipated. "You told me she was vindictive, that she'd use her connections at the company to destroy your career if you divorced her. You said she had some kind of influence here that made her untouchable." Mariana's voice was getting stronger, more confident. But that never made sense to me, because as far as I knew, she was just a marketing director. A good one, but still just a regular employee. James was staring at her with growing panic. "Mariana, please." So I did some research. She held up the documents. Corporate filings, board meeting minutes, founding documents that are part of public record. Do you want to know what I found? The silence in the room was deafening. I could see James calculating whether he could somehow salvage the situation, while I tried to figure out how much Mariana had actually discovered. Adeline Kincaid isn't just a marketing director, Mariana continued, her voice now steady and clear. She's one of the 3 founding partners of this company. She owns 30% of Kincaid Marketing Solutions and sits on the board of directors. She turned to look directly at me. Which means every story James told me about you being powerless, about him being trapped by your connections, those were all lies, weren't they? You don't have connections here. You are the connection. You have actual power, real authority, and he's been lying to me about it for months. I didn't respond immediately, mainly because I was impressed by her thoroughness. She'd managed to uncover in one afternoon what James had successfully hidden from her for their entire relationship. More than that, Mariana continued, if you're a board member, then you would have known about any legitimate performance issues with company employees. You would have been involved in any discussions about personnel changes or terminations. She looked back at James with something that might have been discussed. Which means when you told me that Adeline was sabotaging your career and that you needed to expose her incompetence publicly, you were lying about that too. James stood up abruptly, his face flushed with desperation. Mariana, let me explain. Explain what? How you convinced me that your wife was some kind of abusive monster who was destroying your life when actually she's one of your bosses? How you made me feel sorry for you, made me think I was helping rescue you from a terrible situation. Her voice cracked slightly. How you turned me into the other woman in an affair I didn't even realize I was having? The full scope of James's manipulation was finally becoming clear to her, and watching her process it was both painful and fascinating. She'd been genuinely deceived, genuinely convinced that she was helping a good man escape from a bad marriage. I never lied to you about my feelings, James said desperately. Everything between us is real.
Is it? Mariana's laugh was bitter. Because according to these expense reports, every romantic dinner we had was paid for by the company and categorized as a client entertainment expense. Every weekend trip was billed as a business retreat. Even the flowers you sent to my apartment were charged as client relations materials. She threw the documents on James's desk, and I could see pages of credit card statements, expense reports, and reimbursement requests. She'd been thorough, devastatingly thorough. You didn't just lie to me about your wife, James. You used company money to fund our entire relationship while making me believe it was all coming from your personal feelings for me. James reached toward her, but she stepped back sharply. Mariana, please. The money doesn't matter. What we have is real. What we have, she said with quiet fury, is a professional relationship that you corrupted with lies and fraud. What we have is you manipulating me into helping you commit career suicide. She turned to me one final time. Adeline, I owe you an enormous apology. I said terrible things about you based on lies he told me. I actually believed you were abusive, controlling, that you were hurting him. Her voice broke. I'm so sorry. Before I could respond, she walked out of the office, leaving James and me alone with the wreckage of his carefully constructed deception. The birthday party was starting in less than an hour, and somehow I suspected it was going to be even more dramatic than any of us had planned. The 30 minutes between Mariana's dramatic exit and the start of my birthday party passed in a strange, suspended state. James sat slumped in his desk chair, staring at the scattered documents she'd left behind, evidence of his systematic deception laid out in black and white. She's going to ruin everything, he said finally, his voice hollow. I think you managed that all by yourself, I replied, gathering my purse. I need to get ready for the party. Adeline, wait. He looked up at me with something that might have been genuine desperation. What happens now? To us, I mean. The question hung in the air between us. 8 years of marriage, reduced to this moment in his office, surrounded by expense reports that proved he'd been stealing company money to fund an affair with a woman he'd manipulated with lies about me. I think you know the answer to that, James. We could start over. Counseling, maybe? I could get help, figure out why you what?
Why you embezzled funds? Why you lied to a young woman to manipulate her into an affair? Why you planned to publicly humiliate me at my own birthday party? I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Some things can't be fixed, James. Some betrayals are too complete. He nodded slowly, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. But it was too little, far too late. Will you tell them tonight? About the divorce, I mean. I think tonight has quite enough revelations planned already. I left him there and walked to the ladies' room to freshen up before the party. My reflection in the mirror looked remarkably composed for someone whose marriage had just imploded. Maybe that was because the marriage had been over for months. I was just finally acknowledging it. The company's main conference room had been transformed for the celebration. Someone had hung streamers and balloons, and there was an impressive spread of catered food along one wall. About 40 employees had already gathered, chatting in small groups with drinks in hand. The atmosphere was festive, warm, exactly the kind of party that would make James's planned public humiliation even more shocking. Except tonight, he wouldn't be the one delivering surprises. Bobby spotted me first and made his way over with Paul close behind. "How are you holding up?" Bobby asked quietly. "Better than expected, actually. Where's Mariana?" "Haven't seen her since James's office. Think she might not show up?" "Oh, she'll be here," Paul said grimly. "Someone that angry doesn't just disappear. She'll want to see how this plays out." He was right. At exactly 6:15, Mariana appeared in the doorway, having clearly gone home to change. Gone was the professional attire she'd worn earlier. Instead, she'd chosen a striking red dress that made her look older, more confident. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled in elegant waves, and she carried herself with the poise of someone who'd made a decision and was completely committed to it. She scanned the room until she found me, then walked directly over, ignoring the curious glances from colleagues who wondered why James's secretary was approaching his wife so purposefully. "Adeline," she said when she reached me, "I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to stay for your party." "Of course. You work here." "Not for much longer, I suspect." She glanced around the room. "Has James arrived yet?" "Not yet. He's probably trying to figure out how to salvage his plan for tonight." Mariana's expression hardened. "Oh, I don't think he'll be making any speeches tonight. I've taken care of that." Before I could ask what she meant, Bobby stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, raising his voice to address the room, "if I could have everyone's attention for just a moment." The chatter died down as people turned toward him. I noticed James slip into the room, looking around nervously before spotting our little group near the front. "First of all," Bobby continued, "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate Adeline's birthday. But before we get to cake and presents, I have some exciting news to share about the company." James froze near the back of the room, clearly realizing that his plan to control the evening's narrative was already falling apart.
As of today, the board has approved the creation of a new executive position, Chief Strategy Officer, with oversight of all client relationships and business development. Bobby smiled in my direction, and I'm pleased to announce that Adeline Kincaid will be stepping into this role, effective immediately. A murmur of surprise and congratulation rippled through the room. I could see colleagues processing this information, trying to understand how someone they'd known as a marketing director had suddenly been elevated to executive leadership. "Now," Bobby continued, "Adeline has something she'd like to share with all of you." This was the moment I'd been preparing for all week. I looked out at the faces of people I'd worked alongside for years, people who had no idea they were about to witness the complete destruction of one man's career and marriage. But before I could speak, Mariana stepped forward. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room, "I think I should go first. There are some things everyone needs to know about what's been happening at this company, things that James Kincaid thought would never come to light." James went white as a sheet. Whatever Mariana had planned, it was going to be devastating. And I realized that my revenge was about to get some unexpected assistance. The conference room had gone completely silent.
40 pairs of eyes shifted between Mariana, standing confidently in her red dress, and James, who looked like he was about to be sick. I could feel the collective tension as everyone sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Go ahead, Mariana," I said quietly, stepping back to give her the floor. "Sometimes the best revenge comes from letting your enemies destroy themselves." Mariana smiled, not the nervous, apologetic expression I'd expected, but something sharp and purposeful. She'd clearly spent the afternoon planning this moment just as carefully as James had planned his. "Thank you all for including me in Adeline's celebration," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I know some of you might be wondering why James's secretary is addressing the room, but I think after tonight, my role here will be very different." James started moving toward the front of the room, probably hoping to interrupt whatever she was planning, but Paul stepped smoothly into his path, blocking his approach with a casual conversation about quarterly reports. "You see," Mariana continued, "I've learned some very interesting things today about the company I work for, about the people I work with, and about the man I thought I knew." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small stack of papers, the same documents she'd confronted us earlier, but organized now into a presentation. "For the past 6 months, I've been helping James with what I believed were legitimate business activities: client entertainment, strategic planning retreats, relationship building with key accounts. I processed expense reports, scheduled meetings, and managed communications, all in the spirit of supporting what I thought was important work for the company." The room was captivated. Even people who'd been chatting near the food table had moved closer to hear what was unfolding. What I discovered today is that nearly every expense I processed was fraudulent. Every client dinner I scheduled was actually a personal date. Every strategic planning retreat I coordinated was actually a romantic getaway, funded entirely by company money. A murmur went through the crowd. James tried again to move forward, but now Bobby had joined Paul in casually but firmly keeping him contained in the back of the room. "But that's not even the worst part," Mariana said, her voice gaining strength. "The worst part is that James manipulated me into helping him by telling me elaborate lies about his marriage." She looked directly at me, and I saw something that might have been admiration in her expression. "He told me that Adeline was abusive, that she screamed at him at home, threatened his career, used her connections at the company to undermine him professionally. He convinced me that he was trapped in a toxic marriage with a woman who was sabotaging his work out of spite." The gasps were audible now. Several people actually turned to look at me with shock and confusion, trying to reconcile this description with the colleague they'd known for years. Based on these lies, I felt sorry for James. I wanted to help him. So when he suggested that we needed to expose Adeline's true nature publicly, when he told me that tonight's party would be the perfect opportunity to reveal her incompetence and abusive behavior, I agreed to help. James made one final desperate attempt to reach the front of the room, but now it seemed like half the company was inadvertently blocking his path, too fascinated by Mariana's speech to notice his increasingly frantic movements. "What James didn't know," Mariana continued, "is that I'm actually quite good at research, and when some things about his stories didn't add up, I decided to investigate." She held up the papers in her hand. "It took me less than 4 hours to discover that Adeline Kincaid isn't some mid-level employee with mysterious connections. She's one of the 3 founding partners of this company. She sits on the board of directors. She owns 30% of Kincaid Marketing Solutions." The room erupted. People were turning to stare at me, at James, at each other, trying to process this revelation. I'd managed to keep my ownership stake quiet for 8 years, and now it was being revealed in the most dramatic way possible. "Which means," Mariana said, raising her voice over the chatter, "that every story James told me about being victimized by his powerless, vindictive wife was a complete fabrication. He wasn't trapped by an abusive spouse. He was married to one of his bosses and planning to publicly humiliate her using company resources and fraudulent expenses." James finally broke free from the crowd and reached the front of the room, his face flushed with desperation and anger. "Mariana, that's enough," he said, trying to project authority. "You're clearly upset, but this isn't the time or place." "Actually, James," she interrupted smoothly, "I think this is the perfect time and place. After all, you chose Adeline's birthday party as the venue for destroying her reputation. I'm just returning the favor." She turned back to the crowd, which was now completely silent again, hanging on every word. "There's more," she said simply, "much more." I realized that Mariana hadn't just discovered the truth about James's lies, she'd uncovered everything. And she was about to systematically dismantle him in front of everyone we worked with. It was going to be brutal. It was going to be thorough, and it was going to be absolutely devastating. Sometimes, the best revenge is letting someone else deliver it for you. Mariana wasn't finished. If anything, she was just getting started. She pulled another document from her stack, and I could see James's hands actually trembling as he realized how thoroughly she'd prepared for this moment. James has been systematically defrauding this company for over 18 months, she announced to the captivated crowd. But it's not just the fake expense reports. He's been using his position to manipulate client relationships for personal gain. She looked directly at Bobby. "Did you know that James has been having unauthorized private meetings with Jennifer Morrison at Randall Industries? Meetings where he suggested that key personnel, specifically Adeline, would be leaving the company soon, and that clients should consider him their primary point of contact." Bobby's expression remained neutral, but I could see several board members in the crowd exchange concerned glances. Randall Industries represented 30% of our revenue. He's been positioning himself as the stability factor while simultaneously planning to destabilize the company by removing one of its founding partners. Not for legitimate business reasons, but to cover up his own misconduct and eliminate the one person with the authority to hold him accountable. James found his voice at last, though it came out as more of a croak. "This is ridiculous. Mariana is clearly having some kind of breakdown." "Am I?" She turned to face him directly, and the look in her eyes was absolutely lethal. "Because I have documentation for every single claim I'm making. Expense reports you signed, emails you sent, meeting records you thought no one would ever examine." She pulled out her phone and held it up. "I also have recordings of our conversations where you detailed your plan to humiliate your wife at this party, where you described exactly how you were going to destroy her reputation to make your affair seem justified." The word affair hit the room like a physical blow. Up until this moment, Mariana had been describing fraud and manipulation. Now she was confirming what everyone had probably suspected but hadn't dared voice. "That's right," she said, reading the shock on people's faces. "James Kincaid has been having an affair with his secretary, me, funded entirely by company money while lying to me about being trapped in an abusive marriage. He turned me into an unknowing accomplice in both corporate fraud and a scheme to destroy his wife's reputation." James was backing away from her now, as if physical distance could somehow protect him from the devastation she was unleashing. "The man you've worked with for 8 years, the man some of you probably respected, has spent months planning to stand up at this party and tell you all that his wife was incompetent, abusive, and dangerous to the company. He was going to present himself as the victim of her vindictive behavior while simultaneously announcing his intention to divorce her." She paused, letting that sink in, then delivered the final blow. He had no idea that the woman he was planning to destroy actually has the power to fire him, that the vindictive spouse he wanted to expose is actually one of his bosses, that every lie he told about her lack of authority was about to backfire spectacularly. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic outside, but 40 people were breathing so quietly it felt like a tomb. James made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "This is all a misunderstanding. Mariana is clearly upset about some personal issues we've been having." "Personal issues?" Mariana's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You mean the personal issue where you convinced me I was helping rescue you from an abusive marriage, when actually you were just using me to commit fraud while planning to publicly humiliate one of the most respected people in this company?" She turned back to the crowd, which was now completely silent again, hanging on every word. "I'm not proud of my role in all of this. But I want you all to know the truth about who James Kincaid really is, because if I don't speak up now, he'll find another way to hurt people, another employee to manipulate, another lie to tell, another person to destroy for his own benefit.
She looked at James one final time, and her expression was pure steel. You wanted to make a speech tonight, James. You wanted to expose someone's true character in front of everyone we work with. Congratulations, mission accomplished. The devastation was complete. James stood there in his expensive suit in front of colleagues who now knew him as a fraud, a manipulator, and an embezzler. His grand plan to destroy me had instead resulted in his own total annihilation. But Mariana still wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," she said quietly, and somehow that made it even more ominous than her earlier dramatic revelations. "Adeline, I believe this belongs to you." She reached into her purse one more time, and what she pulled out made my blood run cold. It was a small digital recorder. "I've been documenting everything for weeks," she said simply. "Every conversation, every lie, every detail of the plan to destroy you. I thought I was gathering evidence to help James prove his case against an abusive wife. Instead, I recorded a complete confession of corporate fraud and conspiracy." She held out the recorder to me with something that looked like genuine respect. "I think you're going to need this for the investigation." Taking the recorder from Mariana felt surreal, like accepting a weapon I hadn't known I needed. The small device was warm from her palm, and I could feel the weight of everything it contained. Weeks of James's lies, his detailed plans for my humiliation, his casual discussions of fraud and manipulation. "Thank you," I said quietly, and meant it more than she could possibly know. James was staring at the recorder in my hand like it was a bomb about to explode, which, in a way, it was. "Adeline," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "please, we can work this out privately. There's no need to—" "To what, James? To let our colleagues know who you really are? To ensure that other women don't get manipulated the way you manipulated Mariana?" I slipped the recorder into my purse. I think that ship has sailed. Bobby stepped forward, his CEO voice cutting through the tension. "I think we need to address some immediate business concerns. James, you're suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Security will escort you from the building." "You can't do this," James said, but his protest lacked any real conviction. He knew as well as everyone else that he was finished. "Actually, we can," Paul said, moving to Bobby's side. "Corporate fraud, misuse of company funds, unauthorized client communications, any one of these would be grounds for termination. All three together, you're lucky if criminal charges are the worst thing that happens to you." As if summoned by the mention of security, two uniformed guards appeared in the doorway. They must have been waiting in the hallway, called earlier when Bobby and Paul realized how this evening was going to unfold. The next few minutes played out like a scene from a corporate thriller. James was escorted from the room in complete silence, 40 pairs of eyes watching his exit. Some faces showed shock, others disappointment, but more than a few showed a kind of grim satisfaction. Apparently, I hadn't been the only one who'd noticed James's increasingly problematic behavior over the past few years. When the door closed behind him, the room remained quiet for another long moment. Then, someone, I think it was David from accounting, started clapping slowly. Within seconds, the entire room had erupted into applause. "Speech," someone called out. "Come on, Adeline, we need to hear from our new CSO." I looked around at the faces of people I'd worked alongside for years, people who now knew the truth about my role in the company, about my marriage, about everything James had tried to destroy. There was curiosity there, yes, but also respect, support, and something that looked like admiration. "I honestly don't know what to say," I began, and realized it was true. I'd spent so much time planning for James's attack that I hadn't prepared for this moment,
the aftermath, the victory, the strange emptiness that comes when a long-anticipated battle finally ends. First, I want to apologize for keeping my ownership stake secret for so long. When we started this company, it seemed like a good idea to understand the business from the ground up, to earn respect through my work rather than my investment. I never intended for it to become a permanent deception. Are you kidding? This from Sarah in marketing. You've been one of the best directors we've ever had. If anything, this explains why you always seem to understand the big picture better than the rest of us. There were murmurs of agreement around the room, and I felt something ease in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. Second, I want to address what happened here tonight. What James did, the fraud, the manipulation, the planned public humiliation, that behavior has no place in this company or anywhere else. Mariana showed incredible courage in exposing the truth, and I hope we can all support her as she deals with the aftermath of being deceived so thoroughly. I looked over at Mariana, who had been standing quietly near the wall, probably wondering what her future looked like now that her boss had been fired and her role in his schemes had been exposed. Actually, I continued, an idea forming as I spoke, I'd like to offer Mariana a position on my new strategic team. Someone with her research skills, her attention to detail, and her obvious integrity would be valuable in helping us rebuild the trust that James damaged. The surprise on her face was genuine. Adeline, I don't know if that's appropriate, after everything that happened. After everything that happened, you chose to do the right thing, even when it cost you personally. That's exactly the kind of character we need in leadership positions.
Bobby stepped forward with a grin. I think that's an excellent idea. Consider it approved by the board. The applause this time was warmer, more celebratory. People were starting to move around again, the formal tension of the confrontation giving way to something that felt more like an actual party. But as the conversations resumed and people began gravitating back toward the food and drinks, I found myself thinking about James. Where was he now? What was he thinking as he sat in his car in the parking lot, his career destroyed, his marriage over, his reputation in ruins? I realized, somewhat to my surprise, that I felt sorry for him. Not sorry enough to forgive him, not sorry enough to minimize what he'd done, but sorry for the waste of it all, the talent he'd squandered, the relationships he'd destroyed, the life he'd thrown away for nothing more than wounded pride and ego. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, investigations, depositions, and probably criminal charges. Tonight, though, was for celebrating the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As I looked around at my colleagues, my friends, I realized that James's betrayal had given me something unexpected, the chance to finally be myself completely, to stop hiding my role in the company I'd helped build, to step fully into the leadership position I'd been avoiding for 8 years. Sometimes destruction clears the way for something better to grow. The party continued for another hour, but it was unlike any birthday celebration I'd ever experienced. What should have been casual socializing had transformed into something more significant, colleagues approaching me with genuine curiosity about my background, asking thoughtful questions about the company's future direction, sharing ideas they'd been hesitant to voice before. Mariana stayed close, still processing everything that had happened. Around 8:30, as people began to drift away, she approached me with obvious nervousness. Adeline, about your job offer, are you sure? I mean, after everything I said about you, everything I believed. Mariana, you were lied to by someone in a position of authority who manipulated your emotions and professional loyalty. The fact that you figured out the truth and chose to expose it, even when it meant admitting you'd been deceived, tells me everything I need to know about your character. She nodded slowly. I keep thinking about all the signs I should have seen. The way he never wanted to talk about you directly, always deflecting when I asked specific questions. How his stories about your behavior never quite matched what I observed when you were together in meetings. James is very good at manipulation. That's what made him successful in sales, and it's what made his lies so convincing. Can I ask you something personal? She said hesitantly. Of course.
Were you ever actually happy? In your marriage, I mean. Because watching you together at company events, you always seemed what? Content, but not joyful, like you were playing a role rather than being yourself. The observation was uncomfortably perceptive. Looking back, I think I was happy with the idea of being married to James rather than actually being happy with James himself. Does that make sense? More than you know. I think I was in love with the story he told me about himself. The devoted husband trapped by an unreasonable wife, the dedicated professional being undermined by office politics. The real James, the one who would use company money to fund an affair while planning to publicly humiliate his wife, I never would have been attracted to that person. By 9 o'clock, only Bobby, Paul, Mariana, and I remained in the conference room. The maintenance crew had already cleared away most of the party decorations, leaving behind only the lingering scent of birthday cake and the weight of what had transpired. "So what happens next?" Paul asked, settling into one of the conference chairs. "Legal will want a full investigation, obviously. We'll need to quantify the financial damage, review all client communications, probably bring in an outside forensic accountant." "What about the Randall Industries situation?" I asked. "If James has been making unauthorized promises or commitments." "I'll call Jennifer Morrison first thing Monday morning. Full transparency about what happened, assurance that you'll be their primary contact going forward. She'll appreciate the honesty, and it'll help us maintain the relationship." "And James?" Mariana asked quietly. "What happens to him?" The three of us exchanged glances. It was Bobby who answered. "That depends partly on how much he cooperates with the investigation, how much money we can recover, whether he's willing to make full restitution. But honestly, Mariana, he's committed serious crimes. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, possibly securities violations, given his attempts to manipulate client relationships. The company can choose whether to press charges, but the evidence is overwhelming." "I know he deserves whatever consequences he faces," she said. "It's just, I keep thinking about how completely he fooled me. What if I hadn't gotten suspicious? What if I hadn't done that research? He would have succeeded in destroying Adeline's reputation, probably would have continued stealing from the company, and I would have helped him do it." "But you did get suspicious," I pointed out. "You did do the research. You chose truth over loyalty to someone who didn't deserve it. That matters." As we finally prepared to leave, Bobby pulled me aside. "You know this changes everything, right? Not just your role in the company, but how people see you, how you'll need to operate going forward. You can't go back to being invisible."
He was right, of course. For 8 years, I'd been able to observe, to understand the company culture from within, to see how people really behaved when they thought no one important was watching. That anonymity was gone forever. "Are you ready for that?" Paul asked, joining our conversation. "For the responsibility that comes with people knowing who you really are?" I thought about James, probably at home right now, realizing that his career was over, his marriage was finished, and his reputation was destroyed. I thought about the employees who'd watched him manipulate and undermine colleagues for years. I thought about Mariana, who'd been turned into an unwitting accomplice and was now facing the challenge of rebuilding her professional identity. "I'm ready," I said, and realized I meant it completely. Walking out to the parking lot, I felt lighter than I had in months. My marriage was over, yes, but it had been over long before tonight. My privacy was gone, but I was tired of hiding. My comfortable anonymity was finished, but I was ready for the responsibility that would replace it. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and investigations, difficult conversations, and hard decisions. Tonight, though, I was simply a woman who had survived an attempt to destroy her and emerged stronger. Sometimes the best birthday gifts are the ones you give yourself. The weekend passed in a strange blur of practicality and surreal quiet. Saturday morning, I met with Melissa, my lawyer cousin, who drafted the original investment agreement 16 years ago. She reviewed the evidence Mariana had provided and confirmed what I already knew. James was facing serious criminal exposure. "The recordings alone are enough for multiple felony charges," she said, spreading documents across my kitchen table. "Conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud if any of this crossed state lines. And that's just the financial crimes."
What about the personal side, the divorce? With this level of documented deception and financial misconduct, you'll get everything you want and more. The prenup he insisted on actually works in your favor now. It has clauses about infidelity and criminal behavior that essentially void any protections he thought he'd secured. Sunday evening, my phone rang. James. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Adeline? His voice sounded hollow, defeated. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I need to know. Are you going to press charges? That's not really up to me anymore, James. The company has its own legal obligations. I could make restitution, pay back everything I took, with interest, cooperate fully with any investigation. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice cracked slightly. I know this doesn't matter now, but I never meant for it to go this far. The lying, the manipulation, it started small and just kept growing. I convinced myself that I was the victim in our marriage, that you were somehow holding me back. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know that the man you married 8 years ago, he was real. Flawed, obviously, but real. What I became, that wasn't who I wanted to be. James, you planned to publicly humiliate me at my own birthday party. You stole company money. You manipulated a young woman into believing I was abusive. At what point in that process did you think you were being the person you wanted to be? The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. I don't know, he said finally. I honestly don't know. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet house, the house that would soon be entirely mine, and thought about forgiveness. Not the kind that excuses behavior or minimizes harm, but the kind that releases you from carrying someone else's toxicity forward. James had made his choices. He would live with the consequences. But I didn't have to carry his guilt or his regrets into whatever came next. Monday morning would bring my first day as Chief Strategy Officer, my first public board meeting, my first step into the leadership role I'd been avoiding for nearly a decade. I was ready. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a new beginning. I dressed carefully, a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without being aggressive, the sapphire earrings my grandmother had left me, the confidence that comes from finally stepping into your own power. The office felt different as I walked through the main floor. Conversations paused as I passed, not with the uncomfortable tension of the past week, but with the respectful acknowledgement due to someone whose role had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer Adeline, the marketing director who happened to be a VP. I was Adeline Kincaid, founding partner and chief strategy officer. Mariana was waiting outside my new office, the corner suite that had been hastily prepared over the weekend. She looked professional and determined, having clearly spent the weekend making her own peace with recent events. "Good morning," she said, following in to step beside me. "I've prepared briefing materials on all our major client accounts, with particular focus on any communications James may have had that weren't properly documented." "Excellent. How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected. I've been thinking about what you said Friday night, about choosing truth over loyalty to someone who didn't deserve it. I want to build a career based on that principle." My assistant, former assistant, I reminded myself, had left detailed transition notes and a stack of congratulatory messages from clients who'd heard about my promotion. Word traveled fast in our industry. The morning flew by in a series of strategic meetings. Bobby briefed me on the board's priorities for the next quarter. Paul walked me through the operational challenges we'd been facing. The department heads who'd seemed distant during James's reign were suddenly eager to share ideas they'd been holding back.
At 11 o'clock, Jennifer Morrison from Randall Industries called personally. "Adeline, I have to say, this explains so much about the disconnect we've been experiencing with your company lately. James's communications were becoming increasingly erratic, and some of his suggestions were completely out of line with our brand values. I apologize for any confusion, Jennifer. Moving forward, all strategic communications will come through me directly." That's exactly what we were hoping to hear. In fact, I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss expanding our partnership.
James kept insisting we should limit our scope, but we've been wanting to explore some of the sustainability initiatives you developed. He said they weren't company priorities. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled. James hadn't just been stealing money and manipulating relationships. He'd been actively sabotaging opportunities that didn't fit his narrow vision of success. By afternoon, the forensic accountants had arrived to begin their investigation. I watched through my office window as they set up in the conference room, preparing to dissect months of fraudulent transactions. Justice would be thorough, methodical, and absolutely inevitable. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't the dramatic confrontation or public humiliation James had planned for me. The best revenge was simply being excellent at the job he'd tried to convince everyone I couldn't handle. Success, as they say, is the ultimate vindication. 3 weeks later, I stood in the same conference room where my marriage and James's career had ended, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The walls were covered with project timelines, client strategy boards, and the kind of energy that comes from a team finally working at full capacity. The forensic investigation had concluded with devastating efficiency. James had stolen nearly $2.7 million over 18 months, using a complex network of false expense reports, phantom client accounts, and fictional business trips. The evidence was so comprehensive that his attorney had recommended full cooperation rather than attempting any defense. The plea agreement is finalized, Melissa informed me during our weekly legal update. Full restitution, 5 years probation, and a permanent ban from holding any financial authority positions. He'll also be required to testify if any other employees were involved, though it looks like he acted alone. And the divorce? Finalized next week. You keep the house, the investments, and your company shares. He gets his personal belongings and whatever's left after restitution payments. The prenup he was so proud of actually protected you beautifully. Turns out, clauses about criminal behavior and financial deception are very enforceable. Mariana had thrown herself into her new role with remarkable dedication. Her attention to detail and genuine understanding of client relationships had already strengthened several accounts that James had nearly destroyed through his unauthorized communications. "I've been thinking," she said during our Friday afternoon strategy session, "about why I was so easily manipulated. I think it's because I wanted to believe I was helping someone, that I was making a difference. James used that against me. That desire to help isn't a weakness, Mariana. It's what makes you good at this job. You just need to trust your instincts about people's character, not just their stories. I'm learning to ask better questions, to look for evidence instead of just accepting explanations." The company had not only recovered from the scandal, but was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. With James's toxic influence removed, collaborative projects flourished. Employee morale had improved dramatically. Several clients had actually increased their contracts after working with our new, more transparent approach. Bobby pulled me aside after the board meeting that Thursday afternoon. "You know, I always wondered why you wanted to stay in a mid-level position when you had the authority to take executive leadership from the beginning. Now I understand. You needed to know the company from the inside out. You couldn't lead effectively without understanding how every level of the organization actually functions. Maybe, or maybe I was just afraid of the responsibility. And now?" I looked out the window at the city skyline, thinking about the woman I'd been just a month ago, hiding her true role, accepting her husband's diminishing treatment, avoiding the leadership position she'd earned. Now, I'm ready for whatever comes next. Sometimes, betrayal reveals strengths you never knew you possessed. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best version of yourself. James had tried to destroy me to elevate himself. Instead, he'd cleared the path for me to become exactly who I was always meant to be. The irony was perfect. 6 months later, I received an unexpected text message while reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office. It was from James. "Saw the Forbes article about KMS being named one of the fastest-growing marketing agencies in the region. Congratulations. You deserved better than what I put you through." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations belong in the past. The Forbes article had been particularly satisfying. not because it validated my leadership, but because it highlighted our company's commitment to ethical practices and employee development. Everything James had tried to undermine had become our greatest strengths. Mariana knocked on my door, carrying a tablet and wearing the confident expression of someone who'd found her professional calling.
The Randall Industries expansion is approved, she announced. They want to triple their sustainability marketing budget and add 2 new product lines to our scope. Jennifer Morrison specifically mentioned that she's never worked with a more responsive and innovative team. That's the account James said we should scale back because it wasn't profitable enough. Turns out he was wrong about a lot of things. She paused, then added more quietly, I got a message from him last week. An apology, mostly. He's working at his brother's insurance agency now, doing small business accounts. How do you feel about that? Honestly, I feel sorry for him. Not enough to forgive what he did, but sorry for how completely he destroyed his own life. He had everything: successful career, respected position, intelligent wife who supported him, and he threw it all away because his ego couldn't handle not being the most important person in the room. I thought about that as Mariana left to prepare for our afternoon client presentation. James had possessed real talent, genuine charisma, and every opportunity to succeed honestly. His downfall hadn't been circumstance or bad luck. It had been the deliberate choice to prioritize his wounded pride over everything and everyone around him. The difference between success and self-destruction often comes down to that simple choice. Do you build others up to elevate yourself, or do you tear others down? James had chosen destruction, and it had consumed him completely. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I passed by the lobby where a new employee orientation was taking place. 20 young professionals, eager and ambitious, listening to Bobby explaining our company values. We believe that success is collaborative, he was saying, that the best ideas come from teams where everyone feels valued and heard, that ethical leadership isn't just good business, it's the only sustainable way to build something lasting. I smiled and headed home to my quiet house, which no longer felt empty but peaceful. Sometimes the life you rebuild from betrayal's ashes turns out to be far better than the one that was destroyed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that integrity and competence make an unbeatable combination. I was ready. 2 years after the birthday party that changed everything, I stood at the podium of the National Marketing Leaders Conference, delivering a keynote speech about ethical leadership in corporate environments. The audience of 500 industry professionals was engaged, taking notes as I outlined the systems we'd implemented to prevent the kind of fraud and manipulation that had nearly destroyed our company. Transparency isn't just about avoiding scandals, I explained to the crowd. It's about creating environments where innovation flourishes because people feel safe to share honest feedback, challenge assumptions, and propose bold ideas without fear of retaliation. After the presentation, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the eager determination I remembered from my own early career. Miss Kincaid, I wanted to thank you for your speech. I'm actually dealing with a situation at my company where I suspect my supervisor is, well, not being entirely honest about certain expenses. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but your story gave me courage. Trust your instincts, I told her. Document everything carefully and find someone in leadership you can trust with the information. The right thing to do is rarely the easy thing to do, but it's always worth it in the long run. Driving home from the conference, I reflected on how drastically my life had changed since that October evening when I'd overheard Mariana in the cafe. Kincaid Marketing Solutions now employed over 150 people, had won 3 major industry awards, and had been featured in Harvard Business Review as a case study in crisis management and ethical leadership. Mariana had been promoted to Director of Strategic Partnerships and was pursuing her MBA part-time. She'd started dating a nice attorney from the firm that handled our legal work, someone who appreciated her intelligence and integrity rather than trying to manipulate it. As for James, I'd heard through industry connections that he was slowly rebuilding his career, working his way up from entry-level positions, and reportedly taking a much more humble approach to professional relationships. Whether that represented genuine growth or simply learned caution, I couldn't say. But I hoped, for his sake and for everyone who worked with him, that he'd learned something valuable from the consequences of his choices.
My phone buzzed with a text from Bobby. Great keynote today. Saw the live stream. 3 new clients reached out after your presentation. I smiled, remembering the woman I'd been 2 years ago, hiding in plain sight, accepting less than she deserved, afraid to claim the authority she'd earned. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I'd once known but had long since outgrown. Sometimes destruction really is the beginning of something better. Sometimes the worst betrayal becomes the catalyst for the best version of yourself. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply succeeding beyond anything your betrayer ever imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Bobby. Great keynote today. Saw the live stream. 3 new clients reached out after your presentation. I smiled, remembering the woman I'd been 2 years ago, hiding in plain sight, accepting less than she deserved, afraid to claim the authority she'd earned. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I'd once known but had long since outgrown. Sometimes destruction really is the beginning of something better. Sometimes the worst betrayal becomes the best version of yourself. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply succeeding beyond anything your betrayer ever imagined possible.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.